When a woman can't stop thinking about a man, something powerful has already begun. This is not ordinary attraction. This is not a simple crush. This is not boredom, loneliness, or a passing emotional wave. This is the mind locking onto a presence so deeply that silence becomes loud and distance becomes heavy. Thoughts repeat, memories replay, and imagination fills gaps that reality never explained. And most people misunderstand this state. They think it weakens her. They think it makes her emotional, distracted, or vulnerable. That is a shallow reading, because when a woman's mind becomes occupied in this way, three things start happening on the other side that most people never talk about. A woman's mind is not passive. It is not empty space. It is creative, intuitive, pattern-driven, and emotionally intelligent. When it focuses repeatedly on one person, it does not just think. It observes, predicts, connects, and shapes reality. That is why this state is rare and dangerous at the same time. Rare because women do not mentally attach easily. Dangerous because once it happens, the energy does not stay one-sided. The first thing that happens is an invisible psychological pull begins, not forced, not dramatic, subtle, almost quiet. When a woman thinks deeply and repeatedly about a man, her emotional system starts syncing with the idea of that person. Her tone changes when speaking about life. Her reactions soften or sharpen depending on imagined responses. Her nervous system memorizes emotional patterns associated with that presence. And here is the part most people ignore. Human beings are wired to sense when they are being emotionally focused on. This is not fantasy. This is neuroscience and psychology. Attention is energy. Emotional attention is stronger than physical presence. When a woman's thoughts circle around one person consistently, her behavior shifts in micro ways. Her timing changes. Her expressions carry familiarity. Her intuition sharpens around that presence, and the man begins to feel it without understanding why. A sudden curiosity appears. A random thought interrupts his routine. He checks a phone without reason. He feels a pull but cannot name its source. This happens because emotional focus creates psychological availability. Even without words, even without contact, the mind notices when it becomes the center of someone's emotional processing, especially when the attention is deep, quiet, and constant, rather than loud and needy. Silence with intensity is far more powerful than noise with desperation. That is why obsession is not the right word here. Obsession is chaotic. This is concentrated awareness, and it creates gravity. The second thing that happens is behavioral shift. When a woman can't stop thinking about a man, her internal standards start adjusting. Not lowering, refining, she becomes more selective. Less impressed, less reactive. Because her mind is already occupied, she does not scatter attention easily. She listens differently. She responds differently. She becomes harder to access emotionally while simultaneously becoming more emotionally precise. This creates contrast. People around her feel it. Conversations feel flatter. Attention from others feels thinner. And the man at the center of her thoughts feels this contrast most strongly. Without knowing why, he notices that her presence carries weight. Her absence carries more. There is something in her responses that suggests depth. Not availability, not chase, not performance. Depth. And depth unsettles people who are used to surface-level connection. At this stage, the man often begins adjusting behavior unconsciously. Messages become more deliberate, curiosity increases, validation becomes more careful, the need to be seen positively grows, not because she asked for it, because her internal focus made her less predictable and more grounded. When a woman's mind is emotionally engaged, she stops negotiating for attention. She stops explaining herself excessively. She stops proving worth. Her energy becomes self-contained, and self-contained energy is magnetic. This is where many dynamics flip. The person who was not trying to attract suddenly becomes the one being watched. The person who was simply thinking becomes the one being thought about. The third thing that happens is emotional mirror activation. When a woman thinks deeply about a man, she is not only replaying moments, she is constructing emotional meaning. She imagines conversations, resolves conflicts internally, understands motivations, feels empathy, and sometimes even forgives silently. This internal processing creates emotional maturity around that person before anything even happens externally. And when interaction occurs, that emotional maturity is felt instantly. Her reactions are calmer, her understanding is sharper, her boundaries are clearer. She does not overreact because she has already processed internally. She does not rush because her mind has already explored outcomes. This creates emotional safety mixed with emotional mystery, and that combination is destabilizing. The man begins to feel emotionally seen without being analyzed, understood without being interrogated, accepted without being chased. This activates a mirror response. Emotional curiosity turns inward. Questions appear. Why does this feel different? Why does this person feel familiar? Why does silence feel charged instead of empty? This is where emotional reflection begins, and once reflection begins, detachment becomes difficult. But here is the part that matters most. A woman does not reach this state easily. It happens when something resonates with her values, her emotional rhythm, her sense of meaning. It happens when the interaction triggers safety and stimulation at the same time. And once she reaches this mental focus, she is not waiting, chasing, or hoping. She is observing, feeling, deciding. This is why silence from a woman in this state is not weakness. It is evaluation. It is containment. It is power being held, not displayed. People assume that if a woman thinks a lot about a man, she must be emotionally losing control. The opposite is often true. She is gaining clarity. She is understanding what this connection awakens inside her. And that awareness changes everything, because when a woman becomes aware of what she feels, she also becomes aware of what she will not tolerate. And that is why this state creates impact, not because of pursuit, not because of pressure, but because depth always leaves a mark. If someone has ever felt suddenly unsettled, curious, or emotionally shifted without clear reason, it is often because somewhere, quietly, a woman's mind had already been there, not loudly, not desperately, but fully. In this phase, time starts behaving differently. Moments stretch, small interactions carry disproportionate weight. A glance feels intentional. A pause feels meaningful. And this is not because anything dramatic is happening on the surface, but because depth has already been established internally. When a woman's thoughts keep returning to one person, she begins noticing patterns others miss. Tone changes, energy shifts, inconsistencies, silences. She reads between words without trying to decode them, and this heightened perception subtly affects how she engages. She no longer reacts impulsively. She responds with intention. That alone changes the entire dynamic. What most people don't realize is that when a woman's mind is engaged this deeply, she is not fantasizing constantly. Much of her thinking is evaluative. She is testing emotional alignment internally. She is asking questions without speaking them. She is observing how imagined futures feel, not how exciting they look. This is why her emotional presence becomes steadier instead of chaotic. She is not carried away by impulse. She is anchored by awareness. And awareness is disarming to anyone who is used to emotional unpredictability. At this point, emotional contrast becomes unavoidable. Her calm is not indifference. Her restraint is not distance. It is focus, and focus has weight. It creates pressure without force. It invites curiosity without demand. The man begins to feel that interactions with her require more authenticity. Surface-level behavior feels insufficient. Performative confidence feels transparent. There is an unspoken sense that she sees more than she says, and being seen without control unsettles people far more than being chased. This is also when emotional accountability quietly appears, not imposed, reflected. When someone feels genuinely perceived, they become more aware of their own inconsistencies. Words matter more. Actions carry consequence. Silence is interpreted differently, and even without confrontation, behavior begins adjusting, not because she asked for change, but because her presence raised the emotional standard of the interaction. Another subtle shift happens here. Her imagination stops idealizing and starts integrating reality. She no longer edits flaws out of the picture. She includes them. She weighs them. She notices how they make her feel rather than how they look. This internal honesty strengthens her emotional posture. She does not rush towards illusion. She stands still with clarity, and stillness with clarity is powerful. In this space, attraction is no longer driven by excitement alone. It is driven by resonance, by emotional coherence, by the feeling that something makes sense at a deeper level. And when that happens, her energy becomes quieter but stronger, less expressive but more grounded. People mistake this quietness for detachment, but it is actually emotional consolidation. This consolidation creates a unique emotional signal. It is not loud enough to be obvious, but it is consistent enough to be felt. The man begins to sense that interactions with her linger longer than they should, that conversations echo after they end, that her words replay without effort. This is not because she dominates attention, but because her presence aligns with something internal that has not been activated often, and alignment is addictive. At this stage, emotional influence does not come from persuasion. It comes from coherence, from the way her reactions match her values, from the way her boundaries feel natural rather than defensive, from the way she does not over-explain or over-justify. This coherence creates trust without promises, interest without pursuit, depth without disclosure. The most important thing to understand is that when a woman cannot stop thinking about a man, she is not losing herself. She is learning something about herself through that focus. She is discovering what awakens her attention, what holds it, and what does not. And that self-knowledge changes how she moves emotionally. She becomes less willing to settle for confusion, less tolerant of inconsistency, less impressed by intensity without substance. This internal shift inevitably affects the dynamic. Emotional power moves toward the person who is most internally aligned, and alignment does not need validation to exist. Silence becomes communicative, presence becomes intentional, absence becomes informative, and the connection begins operating on a level that words are not required to sustain. As this unfolds, emotional sensitivity sharpens even more. She becomes acutely aware of how certain interactions make her feel afterward, not during, whether there is calm or disturbance, expansion or contraction, safety or tension. This afterfeel matters more than excitement, and she trusts it more than chemistry. That trust reshapes her engagement. She may appear slower, more measured, less eager, but internally she is clearer than ever. Clarity changes posture. It straightens emotional boundaries without making them rigid. This clarity also alters how silence is experienced. Silence is no longer empty space to be filled. It becomes information. She notices who respects it, who rushes to break it, who grows uncomfortable within it. Silence reveals emotional maturity faster than conversation ever could. And when a woman is thinking deeply, she listens to silence carefully. She watches what emerges when nothing is being performed. At the same time, her emotional imagination becomes disciplined. She no longer feeds stories that lack evidence. She allows curiosity but demands consistency. This internal discipline gives her a calm authority that does not need to be announced. It is felt. People around her sense that emotional games would fail here, that half-truths would land flat, that confusion would not be rewarded with attention. This is where emotional asymmetry often appears. The man may begin to feel more uncertain while she feels more settled, not because she knows the outcome, but because she understands herself within the dynamic. And self-understanding is stabilizing. It removes urgency. It replaces anticipation with observation. She becomes interested without being invested prematurely. That balance is rare and noticeable. As interactions continue, emotional tone becomes more honest. She does not exaggerate warmth to maintain connection. She does not withdraw to create intrigue. She simply responds from alignment, and alignment creates consistency. Consistency builds trust. Trust invites vulnerability. But vulnerability here does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, in softened reactions, in thoughtful pauses, in the absence of defensiveness. This absence of defensiveness is striking. She does not need to protect herself aggressively because she is already grounded. She can hear things without absorbing them. She can disagree without destabilizing. She can step back without collapsing the connection internally. This emotional steadiness becomes a mirror. It invites the same steadiness or exposes its absence, and exposure happens naturally. Patterns reveal themselves. Intentions become clearer. Effort becomes visible. Not because she demands clarity, but because her emotional presence requires it. Ambiguity feels heavier around someone who is internally clear. At this point, emotional impact no longer depends on frequency of contact. Even limited interaction carries density. A few words can outweigh long conversations elsewhere, not because of mystery, but because meaning has been condensed. When a woman's mind has been deeply engaged, she communicates from distilled understanding rather than raw feeling. Her attention becomes selective and deliberate. She does not multitask emotionally. When she engages, she is present. When she disengages, she is whole. There is no fragmentation. This wholeness is felt as strength, even when she is quiet, especially when she is quiet. And the dynamic continues to shift, not through effort, but through gravity. When all of this is understood, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. A woman's mind is not a harmless place to occupy. When she thinks deeply, consistently, and consciously, she is not giving away power. She is shaping reality from the inside out. What begins as thought becomes presence. What becomes presence becomes impact. And impact does not ask for permission. This is why emotional depth is never neutral. It changes dynamics even when nothing is spoken. It rearranges balance without confrontation. It reveals character without accusation. A woman who reaches this level of internal awareness does not need to chase, test, or demand. Her clarity does the work for her. Her silence speaks. Her boundaries teach. Her focus transforms. And the most important part is this: once a woman becomes aware of what her attention can do, she never offers it carelessly again. She understands that her mind is not a waiting room. It is a decision-making space. Whoever enters it changes. Whoever stays is evaluated, and whoever cannot meet the level of depth she now carries simply fades without drama, because real power does not announce itself. It is felt,